All right. Hi, I'm Daryl Anselmo. Thanks for that introduction. I'm super grateful for the opportunity to be here, share some things that I'm working on and things that I'm thinking about. I have a lot to cover here in a very short amount of time, so I am going to be moving pretty quick through all this. And if you find anything useful, talk to me afterwards, or just feel free to refer back to the recording. A little bit about me. I worked in the games industry as an artist and an art director and studio co-founder for over 25 years. These are some of the games that I've worked on. I'm currently based in San Francisco, but I also spend about 10 days a month up in Vancouver, Canada. I'm one of the co-creators of NBA Street and Def Jam franchises for EA. I was the art and creative director for Farmville 2 at Zynga. And I'm also a co-founder with two exits. So my first startup was acquired by Disney, and I stayed on for several years at Disney as a director of art. And in 2016, I co-founded Midwinter Entertainment, which was later acquired by Improbable Worlds. As some of you may know, being a co-founder is not easy living. It takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of energy. And I admit that I was burned out after my last venture, but thankfully the acquisition allowed me the freedom to take some time off and catch my breath. So for the past 2 years, I've been independent, focused on deepening my art practice and my coding skills, and expanding my reach outside of games, and doing more speaking, developing campaigns with some pretty big brands. I'm super obsessed with AI and super excited about how it's shaping design and how it's shaping culture and what it means for the future. I'm also preparing to launch a new studio later this year that's focused on helping companies retool their processes and make the transition towards neural graphics. This presentation is a working document of my recent projects that explore state-of-the-art in image generation. I should clarify, many of you might have access to private models and technology that's beyond what I'm going to share with you. I've seen some amazing stuff already today. This is really just a roundup of tools that are widely available today and how you can use them in novel ways to achieve higher quality and more artistic control over your generations. I am open about my process. This is going to get a bit technical. I'm going to assume you already understand the basics of text to image, but you're not going to need a black belt in Python. You're not going to need a degree in data science to do anything that I'm going to share with you. Anyone here who's a visual thinker, has access to the right hardware, and a curious mind can do any of this today. My goal over the next 20 minutes or so is to help expand the way that you look at the process of image generation and point you in the direction of where to learn more. And hopefully give you a bunch of ideas that you can use to start solving some of your problems today. So a quick hot take before I get into it. The big question on a lot of people's minds right now, myself included, is CG dead? And the short answer is no, not yet anyway, but it is dying. And if I go back to my first job in the mid-90s, this was right when 3D graphics was starting to displace 2D animation. And that was a really, really difficult transition for a lot of artists at the time. And it happened again when mocap came onto the scene and began to threaten classical animation. It happened again with art outsourcing. And I've seen these patterns play out time and time again. You've probably seen them yourself. As long as we're living in techno-capitalist society, these paradigm shifts will continue to happen. So my advice to anyone working in CG right now, or any students that are studying for a career in these fields, has been to ignore AI at your peril. I don't think anybody here would disagree with me that computer graphics is in a creative destruction loop right now. Industry-wide, to me, it feels like we're about there. Neural graphics has actually been around for quite a while already. We're only now starting to see it make its way into more and more commercial settings. There's open debate on the ethics and ROI in various contexts. We're seeing more fumbles out there. Some of us are learning vicariously through these fumbles. If you're in an established organization, you may be further ahead. You may be a little bit behind. If we take the average, to me, feels like we're about there. Super scientific assessment. If I take a look around the corner, as the current product cycles come to an end, we'll see more dismantling, we'll see more retooling. One of the opportunities that I see coming from this is this idea of a hybrid working method. That's where I'm focusing most of my time and attention at the moment. That's applying AI techniques to augment and optimize traditional computer graphics. I'm convinced that in the coming months and years, we'll see a continued decline in traditional raster graphics as it makes way for a rise in neural graphics. And I believe this is especially true with the next generation of consumer-grade hardware, which has a lot of this stuff baked into it. If I come back to today, this is my current stack. Stable Diffusion, Comfy UI are at the core of my workflow. I chose this over other solutions for the level of artistic control and security. Comfy UI allows me to really dial in all the parameters and control exactly where I want things in an image. It's also helped me learn more about what's happening under the hood. I use Koya for training, but if you're just getting started, I might recommend NMKD, which has a simplified training interface that's quite good out of the box. In the interest of time and non-disclosure, I'm not going to get too much into training today. That's probably a full day course just by itself. For 3D, I currently use Blender. Any DCC like Maya or Houdini or C4D or Unreal Engine, those all work. I chose Blender for now because it's good, it's scriptable, and it's free. Upscaling, also a very, very important part of the process. I have used Topaz extensively in the past. I recently switched over to Magnific. And I'll share some output from that in a little bit. I use a little bit of Lightroom and Photoshop for cleanup, color grading, and post, and a little bit of Python, sometimes a little bit of processing for automation. I also use Midjourney. I like it. V6, in my opinion, has probably the best commercially available model with the best aesthetics. Niji also released version 6 yesterday. That's definitely worth checking out. I struggle with the Midjourney interface in Discord and the web. And the current feature set, in my opinion, is limited. I think it works well for brainstorming. I think it works well for synthetic data generation. But for anything that's more production-oriented in the real world, it doesn't really offer the level of artistic control that I need. And I feel like there's privacy issues there. I also really want to call out Focus with 3 O's. It's great. In fact, if you're coming over from Midjourney, but you need more control or you need a local installation, I think Focus is probably the best way to transition your way of thinking and working over to Stable Diffusion. It also has best-in-class in-painting if you need to do a lot of that. So I encourage you to look it up, give it a shot. You can download that from GitHub. I think it installs in 1 click. Quickly, this is what Comfy UI looks like for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's a node-based interface that runs in browser. If you have a workstation and a GPU, you can download Comfy UI from GitHub, get started in minutes. If you don't, you can access it through a hosted cloud provider. I recommend runpod.io. They have a Comfy UI template built right into their deployment. It doesn't cost very much at all to get up and running. I use runpod all the time for overflow, running overnight batch jobs. There are plenty of tutorials on YouTube available to you to get set up with Comfy and locally or on the cloud. One note, if you are doing any commercial work on cloud, you might need data clearance from your client, so just be very conscious about that. You don't want to violate any company policies. You are also going to want to install the Comfy UI Manager. You can find that on GitHub as well. I've got the link down here, but you can also just Google it. The manager allows you to install custom nodes and models in just a few clicks. Once you're up and running, you can plug in a model. I mostly use SDXL Base and Refiner. For personal stuff, I found Realistic Vision and RealViz Excel are quite well done. Juggernaut, Reality's Edge are both useful to me. I do train my own LoRa's and models, but again, due to NDA and time, I'm not going to get into that today. Another note, you'll need to reserve some drive space for this, and models can take some time to download, so just plan that in advance. Another really couple of important notes about downloading models. It is the Wild West out there right now, especially if you're working with characters. Downloaded models often over-index towards not safe for work content. They produce blatant intellectual property violations. Commercial rights are not clearly spelled out. So if you're in a corporate setting, you don't want to violate your company policies. You want to check in with them on that. In fact, what I've found is that a lot of companies still don't even have generative AI policies. So you should be very well aware of all of this and just above board with anyone that you're working with in a freelance capacity. Anytime that I engage with consulting, I have my own generative AI disclosure that spells this all out, and I tend to stay very vanilla with production, and I encourage clients towards training custom models. Once you have a checkpoint model, this is the minimal 6-node setup for SDXL. Checkpoint, positive and negative prompts, empty latent, 1 K sampler and a decoder. If we zoom in on the K sampler, this is the node where the image is generated. It's where the magic happens. These are the scheduler settings that I start with most of the time. I typically use a high step count and a low CFG, but your mileage may vary, especially with the rise of turbo models and LCM. It's really important to plan the resolution of your images. SDXL was trained at 1024, so if there's recommended divisions that you should follow to achieve the various aspect ratios, and there's even a custom helper node out there, I think, that I don't use, but you can use it, puts the optimal resolutions in a dropdown for different aspect ratios, just to make it a little bit more idiot-proof. But now, if you try to go to a non-standard resolution on an empty latent, you're gonna have a bad day. You're gonna get stuff that looks like this. And this is common because everybody wants high resolution images, but they don't fully understand the concept or the importance of an upscaler. I kind of like these. I personally find them pretty interesting. I generated these images deliberately to try and enhance these flaws. But a lot of people that are working with stable diffusion for the first time, they don't intend for a head sticking out of another head, an 8-wheeled Porsche 911. There are many solutions to this problem. They all involve correct upscaling. One technique that you can use is to pass your image through a second K sampler with a latent upscale node. This technique is also known as the high-res fix. In this case, I'm running the first base image through the latent upscale node to effectively double the resolution. In the second K sampler, the scheduler is now set to exponential. The start step is set to 15, meaning that the first 15 steps of the generation are coming directly from that first low-res image, and the remaining 45 steps are acting as a finishing pass. So what you may have picked up on here is that the start at step in the second K sampler makes it a guided image-to-image operation. So in Comfy, image-to-image and text-to-image are using the same process. The only difference is that text-to-image uses an empty latent that starts at step 0. This is one way to upscale, but it's not the only way, and we'll come back to this. But it's important to really think about this concept of multiple K samplers that are top of mind, because multi-pass generation is a really important concept with a lot of different applications to refine your images and achieve higher quality. So just park that idea for now, let it marinate. We'll come back. Moving over to text prompting, if you're not familiar with the Stable Diffusion XL built-in styles, I highly recommend familiarizing yourself with them. This is the SDXL prompt styler node, which allows you to use them. What it does is it actually expands your prompt. So for example, in my initial base prompts over on the left, they're just a few words, but after it's been styled with SAI photographic built in, it adds all these extra words to create longer, more descriptive prompts. We've seen that in a few products today as well. It's the same concept. There are hundreds of built-in styles that you can use. You can access them from the dropdown in the prompt styler node. You can also get under the hood and write your own styles. I've done that a couple of times. This is what it looks like when it's wired up in Comfy. Raw text nodes go into the styler. Style is chosen by dropdown. Augmented text nodes come out and get fed into the text encoder. This is some of the output from my favorite styles that I use on a regular basis. One thing that I should point out, you can integrate an SDXL styler node into any model, even the SD 1.5 architecture. Again, all it's really doing here is expanding your prompts to make it more descriptive. One thing to be aware of is that this technique is highly optimized for the SDXL base model in particular. I found that a lot of other models don't fully respect the styles. So if you take a more photographic checkpoint like Photon, for example, but you're trying to tease out an impressionistic painting from it, there are just too many contradicting variables there, and you will get an image, but you're unlikely to be satisfied with the results. So just be cautious of that. Your mileage may vary if you try to get too creative. One trick that you can do with 2K samplers using prompt styles is a simple style transfer or style blender, style tuner, whatever you want to call it. Run a first pass with one style, finish with another. I do this on almost every single image that I produce. Here, 2 checkpoints. In this case, SDXL base on the top, refiner on the bottom, fixed seeds, decrementing the start steps in the second K sampler. And so here, what we're doing is we're traveling from art style impressionist to SAI photographic to produce a gradient between impressionism and photorealism. And so maybe you can use this technique to help dial in and really find that sweet spot for the project that you're working on. You'll notice here that even though we're on a fixed seed, once the prompt gets expanded, the words are different in both of the prompts. So what happens is we end up style transferring between two similar but different images with different structure. If you need to do this operation with two more structurally similar images, you can use a control net. There are many different types of control net models. In this case here, I'm using the Canny Control LoRa. This is an image Canny filter node that acts as a preprocessor to produce an outline of the original image that then we can use as output for the control net. And then you apply that to the conditioning to help guide the diffusion. So here on the top row, I have control net turned off. You saw what we saw before. The house starts to drift towards a new image the closer that we get to the photographic style. But on the bottom row, we have control net turned on. So now it adheres to the structure of the original image, and we can push the stylization much further if we want. That image in particular is pretty interesting to me. It has this hyper-real quality to it that's not easily achievable through typical prompting. Probably only through the use of control net and traveling through style transfers can you get something like that. I'm a big fan of control net. I think it's really one of the secret sauces that elevates stable diffusion towards something that looks more like a production-grade artistic tool set. There are many different control net models that are available. There's OpenPose, for example, which is meant for posing characters. Some of the results that I see are very, very good with it. There's also this one, which is called QR Code Monster, which is sometimes referred to as diffusion illusion. This is the same model that's used to create all those AI spirals that came out a few months ago. It's actually a very powerful and effective model for controlling the tone of your image. I use it all over the place to create stronger shape language. I should note this particular image was generated in SD 1.5 using the realistic vision checkpoint. I will say today that the SD 1.5 version of QR Code Monster, in my experience, tends to respond a lot better than the SDXL version of it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Here's another demo of a control net. I'm going to be using the depth control LoRa in SDXL. This is a viewport image directly out of Blender. It's a very simple scene. There's only two objects here, a flat plane that represents the ground, and I downloaded a Porsche 911 model by Carol Miklas. Very, very good model. It's important to note there's no need for UV unwrap. There's no complex materials here. There's no shader graph. There's no lighting setup, no fog, no render settings. It's just simple meshes. The scene took me less than 5 minutes to set up. I depth render that out of Blender, plug that into the control net depth LoRa in SDXL, and guided by a simple prompt styled by Sci Cinematic, we get the expected results, reproducible, and you can just see, you just keep this going over and over and over again. Oops, went too far. So with control net, you can get images that are consistently styled with fine control over the composition and minimal guidance. If your client doesn't like the position of the car, wants more negative space for a masthead, make it pop, color changes, it's all achievable with this method. A few things to note, the models for control net and SDXL and SD 1.5 are different models. So if you're passing images back and forth between different architectures, with control net, you're gonna need multiple models. You're gonna need to condition separate prompts for each pass. Your workflows can just start to get pretty big and unwieldy. Manageable, something to keep in mind. Also, if you're using the SDXL refiner model, some of the control net models are incompatible with that, so that's something to keep in mind too. If you are using the refiner model, I recommend placing it near the end of your workflow, just to refine those last 10 or 15% before upscaling. Here's another important technique. This is called regional prompting. It's also known as conditioning masks. If you ever wanted multiple prompts and the ability to choose exactly where they appear in a single image, you can create masks and condition them for that. So for example, here we have one prompt for the general environment assigned to the black upper region as our base, and a second prompt for lavender fields that's assigned to the lower white region. So we set the mask and we combine them using a conditioning combine node. And here are the results of that operation. So if you want to do this yourself, the nodes that you should look up are conditioning set mask, conditioning combine. There is also a conditioning concatenate node. It maths differently, can produce slightly different results. Now there's also a strength variable on the conditioning set mask node. That means you can dial this in as much as you want on the additional prompt that you want combined in. So here on the left is the original prompt with strength set to 0 on the lavender field, and the lavender field is slowly added in on a fixed seed with a strength slider. And you can see every step of the way, it perfectly resolves the transition. Every one of these images is coherent. So again, another killer technique you can use to have greater control over your images is conditioning masks. This is what a minimal network for that looks like. 2 prompts, 2 prompt stylers, 2 text encoders. At the bottom, we're loading in the mask, plugging that into the conditioning set mask node, which is then combined with the conditioning from the first prompt, fed into the K-sampler. That's it. Now, another really important tool at the moment is called an IP adapter. It's a little similar to an image prompt, but it's far stronger and it's a lot more flexible. What this does is it uses vision to look at an input image, break it down into tokens, and then add that information into your model. You can think of it like a one-shot LoRa, but it doesn't need training. So for example, let's say I have this image of an orange 911. I want to inject the tokenization of that image into my prompt. I can use an IP adapter. This is the kind of result that you can expect when I run that prediction. Of course, strength. It's also on a slider. So you can dial it up and down, fine-tune the amount of influence from the images in your IP adapter. Here you can see around 0.6 actually starts to lose track of the car on this particular seed. You can dial it past 1.0, you can overcrank it, but it starts to deep fry the image, so you want to be careful with that. You're gonna have to play around with the strength and the noise to get exactly the amount of influence that you need. By default, the IP adapter and the prompt in Comfy, they both cover the entire image. But you can use attention masking to apply the IP adapter to any region of the image. So for example, if we just wanted the information and tokens in the car image to be located into a smaller area in the bottom center, we can mask that in and you can cue the prompt. And we get a more concentrated result as expected. You can stack multiple IP adapters on top of each other, give them their own weights and their own masks. So here we have the prompt again as a base that fills the entire image in black. We inject 911 into the red channel, the image from that. We introduce a new image that's got some jungle in it, and we plug that into the green channel. We want to see what that looks like. And here are the results, probably what you'd expect. Of course, you can get more variations on that motif, cherry pick the ones that work best for you. You can add control net to get the elements placed more precisely where you want them. Really, the only limit here is your imagination. IP adapters, very powerful for prompting with images, especially in combination with attention masking. Earlier, I'd mentioned how critical upscaling is. I want to come back to this and cover a bit of post-processing before I close out for the night. Earlier, I shared this high-res fix workflow, but there are a couple of other techniques that are maybe a little bit more state-of-the-art. The first one worth mentioning is the Ultimate SD upscale node. This takes an image and creatively upscales it while it's guided by your prompt. It actually breaks the image down into smaller tiles, upscales each of those tiles individually, reconnects them, and blends the seams. Multiple options for how you want that operation to perform. It's doing a lot. It can take quite a long time to generate locally. I have a 4090, it still takes forever. There are a lot of parameters that need to be dialed in here, so it can be a real challenge. If you want to tackle this workflow, you have to allocate quite a bit of time to just dial it in and get it just right. This isn't easy stuff. So this is our original low resolution, and there's companies out there that are building upscalers that master that technique. Anyway, this is our low resolution image. This is it with a very basic 2x upscale, very minimal tweaking to the base parameters. You know, at first glance, it looks a little crisper, it looks a little bit cleaner. But if we zoom in and we start to look at the close-up, that's our original image, and then we compare it to our upscale, you can see it's like, yeah, sure, it's added some detail, it's cleaned up a few of the lines. It's almost like brought more attention to some of the telltale, it just looks AI-y. And to the trained eye, it looks worse. Now, I admit I didn't dial in all the settings here. I didn't add a stack of detail LoRa's. I didn't use control net. This is just out of the box demonstration for someone that may be new to this node and some of the things that you may be going through as you practice that node. But again, because there are so many parameters here, it's going to take a very long time to get right. Probably days. So if you don't have time for all that, but you do have a little bit of money kicking around and your company is fine with you uploading images to a cloud service, there is another option that I recommend for upscaling. That's magnific.ai. This is a cloud service that runs in browser. It's using a similar technique, but it's been highly optimized. I think it just does a great job. That free pick, they look pretty good. I'm going to check that out at the end as well. Here's the original low-res image again. Here it is upscaled by Magnific. Again, the original in close-up. Magnific. Not perfect, still some visible flaws, but it's a lot cleaner. I've been impressed with Magnific. I'm also seeing a lot of similar upscale models that are now coming out, or companies that are building these. I'm trying to pay close attention to all of them because I know how difficult of a problem this is to solve. Trying to develop my own upscaling workflow as well so that I've got something that's for secure local use. But the last thing that I'm going to cover today very quickly is post-production. Every image that I produce, it typically enters Lightroom near the end of my pipeline. One of the things that you might be noticing is that most AI images out there are really juiced when it comes to color, comes to saturation, brightness. They're just really intense. And to my eye, it's one of the tells that it's an AI image or that it's synthetic media. So often I just find I make subtle tweaks like reducing contrast, adding vignettes. I like a little film grain. I like a little flaws in there, usually just like a 2 or a 3% tweak to the image. I don't want to overdo it, make it look over-processed or deep fried. If I see any obvious flaws, I'll clean them up. I don't know if you caught that. There's just some lights I didn't like in there. So again, very tiny, 2 or 3% of the image. I don't want to overwork it. I just want to take care of any distractions, things that I don't like. For bigger in-painting jobs, I recommend Focus. But for minor touch-up, generative fill in Photoshop is a great in-painting workflow right now. And when I'm happy with the edits, I pull the trigger and I call it done. A couple more examples. Here is before upscale and post. There it is after upscale and post. Another couple images that are before upscale and post. Subtle. Just adding some detail. That's about it. That is most of what I wanted to share with you today. I didn't go super deep into the 3D stuff today, but I want to emphasize that I am a believer in this idea of a hybrid CG AI workflow. I figure that's a real opportunity space right now. I believe the decline of raster graphics has begun, and we should be paying attention to that. I'm a proponent of comfy UI. It's modular. You can mix and match all the different techniques that I shared today. You can dial it in exactly to your needs. Runs locally if you have the right hardware. Also just want to point out, upscaling is not an easy problem to solve. I recommend using tools that are available to do that. Magnific, in my opinion, appears to be the best that's currently on the market. Here are some other things that I'm keeping my eye on this year. Just want to thank you for taking the time with me. If you're looking for consulting, R&D, if you have any projects that need this type of work, reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And be on the lookout for more announcements later this year. I hope that you got some value from this. I can't wait to see what you come up with by applying some of these techniques on your own. And with that, I'm out.